I began my review last night of the Northampton Saints game, something along the lines of what a brilliant game, and I can say exactly the same for Bath against Sale. The Premiership semi-finals this year, as we suspected they might, have absolutely delivered. Turn off now if you're looking to avoid the result, but this is all about Bath against Sale and Bath getting themselves into the Premiership final. Congratulations to the club. Even as a Bristol fan, I can appreciate the significance of this moment for a club and a fan base that over the recent years really have had to put up with some pretty tough times. Their first final in a long, long time, their first shot at silverware in 16 years. It has been that long, and it was an absolutely brilliant game. So welcome back to the channel. My name's Alfie. Drop a comment down below. What did you make of the game? What did you make of Bath? What did you make of Sale? What have you made of this semi-final weekend as a whole? And if you really fancy it, start looking ahead to the final as well. I'm going to leave that to later in the week, but how do you think those two teams are going to match up? There's so much we can get into. So the comment section, as I say, is where you can put your views. Whilst you're here, if you can like the video and subscribe to the channel as well, then that would be great. But I want to get into it because as it was coming to the end of this game and it looked like Bath had it in the bag, the thing that struck me was, I feel after both of these semi-finals, it is the two teams that are the best all-round sides that have got to the final, which sounds like a really simple point. And you might look, they're number one and number two in the table. Of course, they're the two best teams in the league. This is naturally the final that many of you would have predicted. But what I mean by that is more, they're all-round teams that can do everything. And I feel like previous seasons in the Premiership, once you get to this stage, it has been a certain style of rugby or teams being really good at one thing or being able to keep it tight and play good knockout rugby that has maybe seen them be successful. Whereas I think you look at both of these teams, for Northampton and for Bath, we've seen them play some brilliant, brilliant attacking rugby, some of the best in the league this year. And they are also two teams that have massively improved up front. We saw that with Northampton and the scrum penalties they got against Saracens, and it's been something that I think we've seen from Bath throughout the season, and once again we saw it against a Sale team that, despite all their issues this year, they've always been pretty good in defence and pretty tough up front, and Bath were able to go up against them and get the better of them. But it was just a brilliant game, and both teams absolutely played their stuff. And it was also another semi-final as well, where whilst both teams that won the semi-finals can do the flashy stuff, and we maybe saw it in glimpses, it was semi-finals that were won off the back of the areas that they have improved, off the back of an improving forward pack, on the back of an improving set piece, which makes, I think, the final so tantalising, looking at how these two teams are the most all-court teams that we've got in the Premiership at the moment. So it was absolutely brilliant. I think there's also, speaking of parallels with how these two teams have got tougher. And again, I'm kind of referencing the game yesterday as well as the one today a lot, because there have been quite a few things that struck me in that it was another match today with Bath where I think previous iterations of Bath sides end up losing that game, which was the same way I felt about Northampton's win yesterday. And those of you that watched the video after that, I said there were periods in that game where you felt like previous Northampton teams wouldn't have been able to come back into it or wouldn't have been able to hold on as Saracens came back into it. They would have ultimately wilted and lost the game. And I think likewise here, previous iterations of this Bath team, when Sale were able to get themselves in front, or when Sale were able to drag themselves back into it at the start of, or at the, kind of towards the end of the first half, previous Bath teams I don't think have the character or have the game plan and the resources to get themselves back over the line, to win that final 15 minutes. But Bath were able to do that, and Northampton were able to do that. These are two teams that are way better set up for knockout rugby this year, and massive, massive congratulations to them. So it was a brilliant game. And the match today, it felt like there were matches within matches. There were different periods of the game where we saw kick battles. At some point it felt quite conservative. At other points it felt like it was being played at a million miles an hour. We saw times where the intensity just ratcheted up. There were so many different phases throughout the game. It felt, to me anyway, like a really varied game, which again isn't something that we always say. It was so compelling. And I would also say that despite the fact that, again, we've got to the semi-finals and it's the two home teams that have won, it's the teams that finished first and second that have won, It feels so different to previous years. Like, you know how previous years in the Premiership, and we've all probably got fairly sick of it, where we get to the semi-finals and you kind of know who's going to win, and it's a bit of a formality. You see two fairly one-sided games. We've got quite accustomed to that. This weekend has tore the script up on that. So even though it is the number 1 and number 2 ranked teams, even though it is the 2 home teams, it just feels different. It's felt so much more competitive and compelling to go along with a Premiership, with the exception of the kind of 2 or 3 teams at the bottom, a Premiership that has been so competitive and so compelling this year. The league, without question, this has been the best year for the league in a long, long time, and the semi-finals have played a big, big part of that. I'll say a few bits on Sale, because they deserve a lot of credit. They played their role in this game, number 1, massively. Like, the spirit and endeavour of this Sale team just can't be underestimated. The way in which they won their final 5 games of the regular season, having looked out of the playoff race, winning 24 of 25 match points to get themselves into 3rd and get to the semi-final, and to weather the storm, really, I suppose, particularly in that first half. What was it? 18-5 Bath led at one point, and Sale dragged themselves back into it. They dragged themselves into the lead. This is a Sale team that have struggled this year. I don't feel like they are as good an all-round team as they were last year when they got to the final, but they still have that fight and that spirit, and have reacted brilliantly this season to being written off. So massive credit to them. For me, Sale lost the game in the final 15 minutes. Because, what were the scores? I've jotted it down here. The O'Flaherty try to take them 21-23 in front, and then George Ford missed the conversion around 51 minutes. So I suppose there was a lot of the game to play. But the next Finn Russell penalty to give Bath the lead was on about 64 minutes. So from that point, you're looking at kind of the final 15 minutes. It's a 1-point game. And again, credit to Bath for this. They just played it better, and Sale just lost their grip on the game, I felt. Having come back into it and having looked good and having been putting Bath under pressure, they lost their grip on it. They started giving away too many sloppy penalties. The Augustine Creevy one was a really good example of that. I can imagine when you're in the heat of the battle and you don't quite hear the referee, it's way easier to do than us watching at home, but a sloppy penalty given away. There were a few occasions like that, and they lost the kicking battle. How many times did Bath put it up in the air and it was batted back on the Bath side? And that 15 minutes just got away from them. Bath scored the try, they kicked the conversion. It's a 2-score game, and it was a pretty tall order for Sale to get back into it. They will also rue, I think, in the first half. The stats at halftime showed they'd had way more carries, they'd had way more of the ball, and throughout the game they had a lot more visits to the red zone and were not as efficient as Bath were when they got down in the Sale 22. And that's kind of a bit of a microcosm of Sale's season, isn't it? Even when they were struggling, we all looked at Sale, and their defence was pretty good. They didn't concede too many tries. They just didn't score enough. They didn't pick up bonus points. Now, they did brilliantly to drag themselves into the playoffs, but we kind of saw an element of that again today. And their attack hasn't been quite as efficient. So I think for Sale, it's been a great season given where they were and getting themselves in the top 4. But I think developing their attack and maybe a little bit of depth in that team is where their focus is going to be, trying to get back to the level of depth that they had when they did get to the final. I think losing Akker van der Merwe, for example, and a few other guys in that team means they didn't have quite the same amount of depth, and their attack has fallen off a little bit. So things to work on, but overall I think they should be pretty proud of how they've done this year. As for Bath, you've got a Twickenham final. Northampton, Bath, 2 of the traditional teams in English rugby going at it for what will feel like a historic victory, whoever ends up winning at Twickenham in a week's time. It's going to be a great final. The 2 most all-round teams in the league this year, but also 2 teams that, when it comes down to it in knockout rugby this weekend, have proven that they can get it done. They can tough it out. When it's a real arm wrestle of a game and the tension's on the line and it could go either way, they just have the character. They have the game now up front to be able to get over the line in those matches, and I don't think that was always the case, particularly for these 2 teams over the last few years. So those are my general thoughts on what was a brilliant second semi-final. Give me your thoughts, put it in the comment section. I hit record pretty quickly on these videos after the full-time whistle, so I don't have a huge amount of time to order my thoughts. Hopefully that's all been a fairly coherent narrative for you, but I'm sure someone will tell me in the comments if it wasn't. Comment down below, like the video, subscribe to the channel. See you in the next one.